So the U.S. has now become, for the first time in its history, a net exporter of natural gas, thanks to about 4 BCF a day of pipeline exports to Mexico in 2017 and 2 to 2.5 BCF a day of LNG exports from Cheniere's Sabine Pass facility.
As y'all know, Cheniere has a phenomenal story. They were the pioneers on developing terminals when the gas was coming to the U.S., and they had the foresight to see that things were changing, and they were the pioneers and the leaders on the export of LNG. And they actually have current operating assets and have a lot of assets in development, and they are definitely the pioneer. And sometimes you want to say they're on the cutting edge. I think sometimes they're on the cutting edge, sometimes they're on the bleeding edge.
The Cheniere Sabine Pass facility, where we have 4 LNG trains that are currently in operation. We commenced operations with train number 1 in February of 2016, and we have continued to add an incremental 3 trains. We have another train here that is under construction. Dominion's Cove Point in Maryland recently started making LNG.
Big thing, right now we're in a kind of long on LNG. You call that really a buyer's market. The big question is, when are things going to tighten up again? Our view on it, somewhere in the 2020s, things will tighten up again.
Cheniere is not seeing that oversupply yet in the market. What you would expect if there wasn't a bid for that supply would be that those volumes would show up in Northwest Europe. Northwest Europe has plenty of regasification infrastructure. It has plenty of underutilized power generation capacity that can turn on. It's just a matter of price. And if we look at Northwest European consumption in terms of imports of LNG as measured by UK, Netherlands, and Belgium, it's flat to marginally declining. And then I mentioned 2017 again. The second most volume was added to the LNG market in 2017 in history, after the Qatari megatrains became available in 2010. And everyone was expecting that prices would be very loose, that it would be, again, tons of cargoes going to Northwest Europe. We didn't see it, and we even saw a tight winter. I mean, we saw LNG prices in Asia above $10 an MMBTU, and that is higher than the long-run marginal cost that is needed to sanction new liquefaction capacity globally, which we in our minds is around $8. But again, we're not super excited quite yet. We still have another 25 million tons coming to market this year and another 45 million tons in 2019. But again, very positive signs for those who are in the supply side of the industry. As we continue to look out at the fundamentals, Cheniere is of the same view that the market really starts to tighten. And new liquefaction capacity will be required starting in the early part of next decade. And that means, though, what this means is that new liquefaction FIDs need to be made today, next year, the year after. And that's what we expect. And so if we look at the U.S. liquefaction project landscape, there has been an incredible number of projects that have been put on the drawing board. Something like, I believe here, the 50 BCF a day of projects, of which 10 BCF a day of those are under construction. So clearly not all of this infrastructure is going to get built. There is about 8 BCF a day of projects that are fully approved from a permitting perspective. And most of those, with the exception of one, are brownfield expansions, which we certainly believe that a brownfield expansion project has a cost advantage and it is better positioned than a greenfield development. So, but again, permitting we don't see as a constraint or a bottleneck to getting projects done. It's all about the commercialization. And so for Cheniere, we have 2 shovel-ready, fully permitted trains at both our Corpus and Sabine projects that we could start building tomorrow. But we need to finalize commercial arrangements because we're not going to go out and spend billions of dollars without some type of revenue visibility. We're currently most focused on our Corpus project at this point in time, because our third train at Corpus, you can see there, because the other 2 trains are under construction, and they'll be made available in 2019. The train, it's partially commercialized. We have a contract with EDP, which is a Portuguese utility, and so that's why our efforts there have been geared towards Corpus Train 3. But then once we get Corpus Train 3 commercialized, which we fully expect we will move on to the 6th train. Certainly, we believe we are very well positioned in the U.S. There are other projects that are on the drawing board around the world. You have a great deal of conventional gas offshore Mozambique, and there has been a lot of talk from various developers such as Anadarko and Eni. And Eni actually sanctioned one of the projects that was sanctioned in 2017 was an FLNG project sponsored by Eni offshore Mozambique. And again, when we look at the economics, we don't necessarily think that those are better economics, but from what, if you believe Henry Hub is going to be $3, and maybe even sub $3. But with that said, when we go and talk to the customer universe, the buyers of LNG, right, price is important, but diversity of supply, security of supply, etc., also factor into their decision making. And so, when I put together, internally our LNG supply cost curve, where the Gulf Coast, stacks up, the U.S. Gulf Coast LNG does stack up very favorably if you have $3 Henry Hub, and Western Canadian projects don't. But that doesn't mean that Shell is not going to ultimately make an FID on LNG Canada and convince themselves that they make their return on the upstream somehow. But again, we think the U.S. is very positioned very favorably. But we also have, if we were to, compare Train 3 or Train 6 at Sabine and Corpus versus the Qataris debottlenecking and expansion of a mega train there where the gas is free, they're going to be more competitive, right? The Qataris have publicly said that they are going to remove the moratorium on the North Field, and they intend to grow their LNG exports from 77 million tons to 100 million tons. I'm surprised the Iranians weren't upset because they share the same field, but anyways, they intend to do that, and that's a decent chunk of volume, and that volume is absolutely going to be cheaper than the U.S. Gulf Coast. And but the U.S. LNG projects will debottleneck, right? That's going to be volume. You're going to see Australian debottlenecking likely, and then the Russians also have, some fairly cheap LNG from the Yamal Peninsula area, and they're talking about continuing to grow that footprint. So again, it's competitive. It's a competitive market. The market has gone from supplier power to buyer power as you just added thousands of TCF of reserves in the U.S. and has no other home to go to Mexico or on the water. And so that element, that dynamic has added a great deal of competition to the supply side. And that means everyone is going to be laser focused on costs, and there, we'll continue to see innovation there to get costs down. The Train 5, we expect to start making LNG in 2019. So it's fairly well advanced from a construction standpoint. But what we pride ourselves on is, and we really, thanks in large part to our EPC construction partner, Bechtel, is all of these trains were brought online ahead of schedule. And that some of the other LNG projects like Cameron and Freeport have not been as fortunate there as their projects are, as of today, about a year or maybe a little bit more than a year delayed.
Something different. Everyone's looking at the small scale LNG. There's actually one facility, Elba, who is being put together, like 10 modular units, and the jury's out on that, if that's going to actually be a cost competitive facility being built right now. Shell's the off-taker on that. If you look at Venture Global, I think their business strategy is based on modular units as well, so we'll see how those play out.
When we think about small scale, we actually call it mid-scale. But because a ConocoPhillips train, a ConocoPhillips technology train that Bechtel builds for us, the 7 trains that we've had that have been sanctioned, those are 4.5 million ton trains. And we ran a process and we identified a consortium comprised of KBR, Chart, and Siemens. And this was for a 1.36 million ton train solution. And our assessment was, and what we've said publicly, is that the results are competitive with our Train 6 and Train 3 at Corpus expansion economics. We do see merit in building a modular, smaller train, but the only reason why we would do it is for cost advantages. Being able to FID a smaller train because we don't want to have to go and aggregate 4 million tons of volume. We just want to go aggregate 1 million tons of volume is not as valuable to us because, as I mentioned, we have 4 million tons.